From aged surgical centers rumored to harbor the restless spirits of all those lost to malpractice in an era predating modern medicine, to classically haunted mansions boasting enchanting gardens where it's said the dead roam after dark. Are you ready to explore some of the most haunted places in London? Number 5. Hyde Park. Hyde Park, located off of Hyde Park Place, is a 350-acre expanse divided by the Serpentine and Longwater Lakes that holds the title of being the largest park in the whole of central London. Historically, a park was first established on site in 1536 under Henry VIII when he acquired land from Westminster Abbey, which he would utilize as a hunting grounds. And in 1637, these bounds were opened up to the public and would become popular for gatherings and events, notably for May Day parades. Through the early 18th century, the park would welcome a number of improvements under order of Queen Caroline, during which time a slew of duels were held on park grounds, namely between various parties of nobility, and the Great Exhibition of 1851 would be held on site, for which the Crystal Palace was designed and constructed by Joseph Paxton. In 1872, what's called the Speaker's Corner was established at Hyde as a place where free speech and debate could be held, and at this corner, groups ranging from Chartists to Reform League to suffragettes to Stop the War Coalition have held protests. Through the late 20th century, Hyde Park would begin hosting high-profile concerts, accommodating the likes of Pink Floyd, the Rolling Stones, Queen, and more. And into the present, the site remains a popular choice for all manner of events, such as its annual Hyde Park Winter Wonderland. Over its extensive history, Hyde has been shrouded in a number of tales of terror, with those frequenting its grounds through the eras reporting extreme cold spots, disembodied voices and whispers, encounters with shadowy figures and full-bodied apparitions, and more recently, orbs captured in photography. Chillingly, Hyde also totes a pet cemetery, which was founded in 1881, that holds at least 300 pet-sized markers, and near it, many have reported ghostly paw steps heard through the brush, and phantom animals that appear during heavy fogs, that always disappear when approached. Lastly, a more famous legend associated with Hyde tells of its haunted trees, and highlights accounts from those who have fallen asleep beneath them having horrid dreams, in which they're being attacked by their branches. Disturbingly, several stories detail instances in which would-be daredevils have committed suicide after attempting to spend even one night under these trees, and near the area where one more nefarious haunted growth was previously removed through the 1900s, many describe sensing a pure evil. Number 4. The Old Operating Theatre Museum and Herb Garret. The Old Operating Theatre Museum and Herb Garret in the garret of St. Thomas's Church off St. Thomas Street in the southward district of central London is a museum of surgical history, boasting the title of being the oldest operating theatre in the whole of Europe. Historically, an early church was included on site as part of the original St. Thomas Hospital, which was located in the area in 1212, and a new dedicated church facility was constructed much later in 1703. This more modern church would be fitted with an expansive garret, inclusive of storage space and shelving, and while this garret's initial purpose is not fully understood, at around 1821, it was described and documented as an herb garret, and various powerful medicinal materials, including opium in processing, were uncovered within, leading some to speculate the hospital's resident apothecary may have utilized the space to dry and cure herbs for his work. In 1822, a portion of the herb garret would be transformed into an operating theater, which abutted a female surgical ward, while windows were added into the structure, and it may have even acted as a recovery ward at times. In 1859, Florence Nightingale would form a relationship with St. Thomas's and would set up her renowned nursing school on site, and in 1862, the hospital would be moved to its current location, after which the theater would sit undisturbed undisturbed until 1957. In 1962, the Garrett and Operating Theater were open to the public as a museum, and remain so into the present, housing fascinating educational materials and artifacts, and, as legend has it, their fair share of restless spirits, with both staff and visitors reporting doors and cabinets cited opening and closing on their own, objects spied moving inexplicably, and lights that flicker without cause. Chillingly, early surgeries were performed sans anesthetic, antiseptic, or any form of modern medical comfort, and if procedures didn't kill patients outright, death by infection following was all but common, leading some to ponder how many lives were actually lost within, or directly preceding visits to this place of supposed healing. The apparition of a lady in black, believed to be either the soul of somebody who lost a loved one to an unsuccessful surgery, or of a patient who was lost on the table herself, has been encountered wandering about, donning a melancholy look, and often sobbing softly. Also reported across the property is the unshakable feeling of being watched or even of being followed, and witness accounts of sudden bouts of dizziness, sickness, or of extreme faintness. Lastly, an unidentified woman in white has been spied across the premises, and is often encountered wandering the building after dark, while emitting a faint glow. Number 3. The 10 Bells. The 10 Bells, located at the corner of Commercial and Fournier Streets in Spitalfields on the East End of London, is a historic public house infamous for its purported association with 2 victims of the notorious serial killer Jack the Ripper, including Annie Chapman and Mary Jane Kelly. Historically, since the mid-18th century, the 10 Bells has existed in one form or another, initially as a pub house just off 12 Red Lion Street, just a short distance away, and after this earlier building was demolished in 1851, as a watering hole within the same structure as the 10 Bells we know and love today. While the name of this beloved bar has been altered many times over its lifespan, all monikers have generally revolved around the number of bells in the peal housed at the Christ Church Spitalfields, which sits adjacent. Incidentally, the number of bells has also changed from time to time. In 1755, the establishment was known as 8 Bells Ale House for a time, and altered its title when the church upped its bell count to 12, before again dropping to 8 following a particularly nasty fire in 1836. Rather ominously, between 1976 and 1988, this prestigious pub would be referred to as the Jack the Ripper, and through this stint would display a jumble of memorabilia revolving around the age-old case, though it would eventually reclaim its earlier title, and in December of 2010, landlord John Towney would renovate the 10 Bells in an effort to better showcase its Victorian heritage. The 10 Bells remains open into the present, accommodating countless patrons annually, while serving a sublime range of cocktails, beer, cider, and wine. From the time of its creation, the 10 Bells has seemingly always been tied to the darker side of life, with rumors of its many hauntings surfacing early into its existence. And to date, both staff and visitors frequenting the property have reported disembodied voices and footsteps, the constant feelings of being watched or of being followed, and objects sighted moving on their own, or even floating in midair. More recently, a sack was discovered behind the bar's old water tank, containing a set of moldy, aged Victorian-era baby's garments that were seemingly cut with a knife at some point, and those nearing this area have described sudden feelings of extreme discomfort, accompanied by the sounds of a baby crying, always seemingly emanating from just out of sight. As mentioned earlier, the 10 Bells shares ties to several victims of the notorious Jack the Ripper. In 1888, Elizabeth Stride was thrown out of the pub for being drunk and disorderly. Mary Kelly, accompanied by friend, was sighted on the property one night prior to her slaying, and allegedly, Annie Chapman was drinking at the 10 Bells only hours preceding her demise. The spirits of both Chapman and Kelly are believed to remain on site, as well as the ominous shadowy ghost of a man in Victorian-era clothing that gives off a threatening vibe that some suspect just might be the wandering soul of the fearsome Ripper himself. Number 2. The Ham House and Garden. The Ham House and Garden, located on the bank of the River Thames off Ham Street, just south of Richmond, near London, is a historic abode and ground standing as one of the great Stuart houses that is highly renowned for its meticulously restored interiors and gardens. Historically, this domicile was completed in 1610 under Sir Thomas Vavasour, Knight Marshal to James I. In 1626, Ham House was leased to William Murray, a courtier and close childhood friend to Charles I, and until 1641, Murray would acquire additional lands to add to his lease, when, in the wake of the English Civil War, he would choose to sign the estate over to his wife Catherine and their 4 daughters. In 1649, Catherine would pass on within Ham, after which parliamentarians would sell off a good portion of their estate, while Murray's eldest daughter, Elizabeth, accompanied by her husband, Lionel Tolmach, would purchase the property, and between 1649 and 1661, the couple would welcome 11 children into the world, 5 of which that would survive into adulthood. The Ham House would remain in the hands of the Tolmach family until 1948, when the property, along with all of its contents, were sold off to the National Trust, while its stables and outbuildings were each sold privately. In 1949, what remained of the estate was auctioned off, and in 1950, the site was opened up to the public, and would undergo restorations over the years, even up into more recent times. This aged abode remains open to the public, hosting notable events and offering tours of both the standard and paranormal varieties. The Ham House is surrounded by a number of prominent ghost stories, one of the most famous of which telling that the premises is haunted by the spirit of Elizabeth Murray, Duchess of Lauderdale, who died within in 1698 and who suspectedly murdered her first husband in order to remarry and climb higher on the social ladder. A large mirror held on site has been known to display her image at random, and when staff near it, many issue her a friendly hello or greeting as to keep her spirit appeased. Elizabeth's ghost has also been known to manifest as a woman in black, with a cane that can be heard clicking about as she wanders the old home. This hair-raising story goes on to tell that after Elizabeth's death, a butler on site had a 6-year-old daughter who complained that each night an old hag was entering her room through the wall and scaring her. Eventually, the wall in question was inspected, and it's told that documentation providing evidence solidifying theories revolving Elizabeth's killing of her first husband were uncovered. Other fables surrounding the Ham House and Garden tell that the spirit of Charlotte Walpole, Countess of Dysart, and a former resident on site can sometimes be sighted waving at visitors from an upstairs window, and that spying her may be an omen of good fortune, while others that the ghost of Charles II, who was supported by Elizabeth through his exile, and whom awarded her handsomely upon his return to throne, wanders the gardens, and is often to blame for phantom wafts of tobacco smoke. Some final accounts tell the spirit of one John McFarlane, who fell in love with a kitchen maid and subsequently threw himself to his death from an upstairs window when she rejected him, can still be seen pacing on the terrace, and a mysterious ghostly King Charles Spaniel has both been sighted and heard sliding and scratching across hardwood floors within the home. Number 1. The Tower of London. The Tower of London, or officially Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress of the Tower of London, and located off the northern bank of the River Thames in central London, is a notable castle that has long played a significant role in English history, and that served a number of purposes over its extensive existence. Historically, this site was initially founded in 1066 as part of the Norman conquest. In 1078, the White Tower, from which the castle derives its name, was constructed under William the Conqueror and stood as a loathed symbol of oppression. And through the 13th century, King Henry III and Edward I would expand upon castle grounds and would transform the old defense into a semblance of the fortification we know today, with the creation of a new defensive perimeter lined with towers, and a defensive ditch encompassing this wall. While the tower occasionally served as a lockup in its earlier days, through the 16th century, it built a particularly threatening reputation as a foreboding prison, from which few returned, and within which multiple souls were tortured by means of devices such as the scavenger's daughter, the infamous rack, and the manacles. More recently, through the 19th century, the site would begin picking up traction as a tourist destination, and by the turn of the 20th century would host around 500,000 annual visitors. And though it was heavily damaged in the Blitz of 1940, it would later be repaired and reopened to the public. The Tower of London remains open into the present, harboring the regimental headquarters of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, as well as a museum dedicated to their predecessor, the Royal Fusiliers. Additionally, a detachment from the Queen's Guard unit at Buckingham Palace mounts a local guard tower, and, together with the Yeoman Warders, participates in the Ceremony of Keys, which is held each day. Over its many centuries, the Tower of London has been subjected to literally countless deaths, from natural fates to torturous demises, to lives claimed in sieges, battles, and more. In 1278, it would hold around 600 persons of Jewish faith, who were all charged with coin clipping, in an era of persecution perpetuated by Edward I, who, in 1290, would issue the Edict of Expulsion, which would force any who followed the Jewish religion to leave the country. In 1321, Margaret de Clare, Baroness Battlesmere, would be held in the tower following her refusing Queen Isabella admittance to Leeds Castle, and subsequently ordering her fired upon by archers, which resulted in the deaths of 6 of Isabella's royal escort. In 1841, bouts of disease caused by issues with the water supply would lead to a number of deaths within the king's garrison. Through the First World War, 11 men were tried for espionage and executed by firing squad on site. Through the Second World War, the tower would be utilized to hold prisoners of war, including, in 1941, the likes of Rudolf Hess, deputy to Hitler, and in August of the same year, German spy Joseph Jacobs would be the last person executed on castle grounds. Finally, in 1974, a bombing would result in 1 death and 41 injuries on the property, and while responsibility for the blast was never claimed, it's now suspected the culprits behind the act were affiliates of the IRA. Not surprisingly, its extensively twisted and dark history is believed to have left its fair share of supernatural scars across the whole of the Tower of London, and those frequenting the area have reported doors that open and close by themselves, objects sighted moving on their own, inexplicable temperature fluctuations, and the sensations of being watched, followed, or even of being touched by a presence unseen. One popular local legend surrounding this aged defense is often dubbed the Princes in the Tower, and tells of how 12-year-old deposed King Edward V and 9-year-old Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York, were lodged in the tower by their paternal uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, following the death of their father, King Edward IV, in 1483. While it's still unclear as to what became of the youths, it's now believed Richard killed the boys in order to take power for himself, and in 1674 several workmen would uncover 2 small skeletons that are thought to have belonged to the princes. Eerily, many have reported encounters with 2 child-sized specters, thought to be the restless spirits of Edward and Richard, at times wandering about alone, and at others talking amongst themselves. Also reported across the tower's expanse are orbs and strange mists in the backgrounds of photography, inexplicable electrical malfunctions, instances of lights flicking off spontaneously, leaving all present in darkness, alarms that sound without cause, and encounters with shadowy figures that stalk the living. Among the many executed on tower grounds, Anne Boleyn was put to death by way of beheading in 1536, under her husband Henry VIII, and disturbingly, her ghost is rumored to haunt the Church of St. Peter ad Vincula, where her body is buried. Chillingly, a manifestation bearing her likeness has been witnessed walking around the White Tower, carrying her own head under her arm, and terrifying all who behold her. In January of 1816, a sentry outside the Jewel House reported sighting the apparition of a bear that charged him, and supposedly he died of fright a few days later. In 1817, the keeper of the crown jewels documented encountering a glowing tubular form within the Jewel House. And lastly, across the whole of the site, many have described encounters with a range of full-bodied apparitions at random, some of which that include Henry VI, Margaret Pole, Lady Jane Grey, and even Guy Fawkes. Taking its fascinating and somewhat grim history into account, and coupling it with an impressive assortment of purported hauntings and paranormal phenomena, we felt the Tower of London was a solid choice as the most haunted place in London. Thanks for joining us for our picks for some of the most chillingly haunted places in London. If you enjoyed hearing our histories and ghost stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, throw us a like, and share us with anyone you feel deserves a good scare. We'll catch you next time.